What you withhold can carry more weight than anything you say. Most people operate on the assumption that presence is power, that being seen, being heard, being available, being there, that these are the conditions of influence. They show up to everything. They make themselves accessible. They fill every silence with their contribution, every absence with an explanation, every gap with their continued availability. And over time, they become furniture, present enough to be assumed, available enough to be taken for granted, familiar enough that the room no longer notices when they arrive because they always arrive, and the things that always arrive cease to generate the attention that arrival once produced. Absence changes this entirely. Not the passive absence of someone who has simply stopped showing up, but the deliberate, chosen, philosophically grounded withdrawal of a presence that people had grown comfortable expecting, and that they discover, in its withdrawal, they valued more than they knew. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this through a principle that runs quietly through his entire philosophy. We do not know the value of what we have until we experience its absence. The will, which drives all human desire, is always oriented toward what is lacking, what is present, what is comfortable, what is reliably available. The will passes over this without gratitude, without genuine attention, without the heightened valuation that scarcity inevitably produces. This is not a cynical observation. It is one of the most honest and most practically important things Schopenhauer ever wrote. And understanding it changes not just how you manage your presence in the world, but how you understand what presence actually means. Let's begin with the will's relationship to scarcity, because this is the mechanism on which everything else in this script depends. The will, in Schopenhauer's framework, is the irrational force of desire that drives all living things. It is always oriented toward what is absent, always restless, always seeking satisfaction in the next acquisition, the next resolution, the next arrival of what it currently lacks. The will does not appreciate what it possesses. This is not a moral failing. It is the structural nature of desire. Desire is defined by the gap between what you have and what you want. The moment that gap closes, desire relocates. The possession becomes the baseline. The baseline becomes invisible. The will is already oriented toward the next absence. This means that everything you make reliably available becomes invisible to the will in others. Your consistent presence, your continuous availability, your reliable contribution, all of these, once established as reliable, are absorbed into the baseline and cease to generate the attention, the appreciation, the genuine regard that they once produced. The withdrawal of something that has been reliably available is not a loss in the ordinary sense. It is the reinstallation of the gap. And the gap is where the will directs its attention. The gap is where value is felt most intensely. The gap is where absence becomes, paradoxically, more present than presence ever was. Now, let's be clear about what this means practically, because the philosophical principle requires translation into behavior before it produces any result. Making your absence more powerful than your presence does not mean being difficult, withholding, or chronically unavailable. It does not mean the affected mystery of someone performing depth they don't possess. It does not mean the passive-aggressive withdrawal of someone using absence as punishment. It means being genuinely selective about when your presence is given. Being fully present when you are present, completely, attentively, without distraction, and genuinely absent when you are absent. Not slightly present while simultaneously elsewhere. Not present in body while withdrawn in engagement. Present fully or not at all. This genuine selectivity does two things simultaneously. First, it raises the quality of your presence, because full presence, in a world of chronic partial presence, is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily valued by anyone who receives it. Second, it raises the value of your absence, because the absence of something genuinely full is felt as a genuine lack, not merely a gap in the social furniture. Schopenhauer's philosophy of inner wealth is relevant here in a specific way. The person who has genuinely developed their interior life, who has genuine things to bring to their engagements, genuine thinking to offer, Genuine qualities of attention and care. This person's absence is felt as the absence of something real. The furniture person's absence is not noticed. The genuinely present person's absence creates a silence that speaks. Let's look at what genuine absence actually produces in the people who encounter it, because the effects are specific and worth understanding precisely. The first effect is awareness. When someone who has been reliably present is suddenly absent, when the voice that was always in the meeting is not there, when the message that always arrived has not arrived, when the person who was always available is not available, the first thing people experience is awareness. They notice. And noticing is the beginning of valuation. The thing you never notice, you cannot value. The thing you suddenly notice, you begin to assess. What did this presence actually provide? What is different without it? What was I receiving that I was not acknowledging as a receipt? These questions, generated by the absence, produce a recalibration. The value that was invisible during the reliable presence becomes visible during the absence. The appreciation that was owed but not given during availability is felt, suddenly, and often with surprising intensity, in the gap. Schopenhauer would find this entirely predictable. The will, relieved of the presence it had been taking for granted, orients toward the absence, as it always orients toward gaps. And in doing so, it finally does what it should have done all along, genuinely assesses what was there. The second effect of genuine absence is idealization. This is one of the most psychologically consistent and most philosophically interesting phenomena that absence produces. When something is present, it is available for complete assessment, including all its flaws, its ordinary moments, its failure to match the idea of itself. When it is absent, the assessment is conducted from memory. And memory is selective. It retains the significant, the emotionally charged, the moments that carry meaning, and it softens or loses the ordinary and the disappointing. The absent person is remembered better than the present person is experienced. Not necessarily accurately, but powerfully. The memory of their best moments becomes the primary image, freed from the dilution of the mediocre moments that constant presence inevitably includes. Schopenhauer wrote about this in the context of desire, about how the object of desire always appears more compelling when it is not yet possessed than when it is held. The same mechanism operates in reverse during absence. The person who was present and available is retrospectively elevated by the memory that absence is now generating. This is not manipulation. It is the honest operation of how the will and memory actually function. Understanding it simply allows you to work with the mechanism rather than against it. Let's examine how this principle operates in specific situations, because without the translation into lived experience, the philosophy remains interesting rather than useful. In professional environments, the person who attends every meeting, contributes to every conversation, is available for every request, and never fails to respond immediately, becomes the expected baseline. Their competence is assumed. Their contribution is accounted for without being valued. They are essential in the way that air is essential, genuinely, deeply, and completely without appreciation, until it is removed. The person who is selective, who attends the meetings where their presence is genuinely consequential and is absent from the ones where it is not, who contributes when they have something genuine to offer and is silent when they do not, who is available for what genuinely warrants their availability, and unavailable for what does not. This person's presence carries weight. It arrives as a signal. It means something. And their absence equally carries weight. It is noticed. It produces the question, why are they not here? Both the presence and the absence are information-bearing. Both generate attention. Neither becomes invisible, because neither has been made reliably predictable enough to become part of the furniture. In personal relationships, the dynamic is more intimate, but the mechanism is identical. The person who is always emotionally available, who responds to every vulnerability with immediate comfort, every difficulty with immediate support, every request with immediate fulfillment, becomes the reliable baseline. The support is real. The care is genuine. and it is taken for granted in precisely the proportion that it is reliably provided. The person who is emotionally present when they are present genuinely, attentively, fully, and who is also genuinely absent when they need to be absent, who has a rich interior life that does not require constant external engagement to remain vital, who brings their full self when they bring it, and withdraws when withdrawal is what they genuinely need. This person's emotional presence is experienced differently. It is experienced as a gift rather than as a given. Not because they provide less, they may provide more in genuine quality, but because it is not guaranteed, because it is chosen rather than automatic. Because its presence communicates something that automatic availability never can, that this person is here because they want to be here, not because they know no other way to be. Schopenhauer's insight about the will applies with particular force in intimate relationships. The will always orients toward what it might lose. The genuine relationship where both parties are present from choice rather than habit, where absence is real rather than withheld presence, is the relationship where the will is most actively engaged, most genuinely valuing what is there. There is a deeper dimension to this philosophy that goes beyond the strategic, and it is worth examining on its own terms. Genuine absence, the kind that requires developing an interior life so rich that withdrawal from the social world is genuinely attractive rather than merely strategic, is one of the most honest expressions of selfhood. Available. The person who is always present is often present because they need to be. Because the social world provides something they have not yet found inside themselves, the sense of existing, of mattering, of being real in the eyes of others. This is not criticism. It is the honest description of what drives most human presence. We are present because presence confirms us. Schopenhauer believed that the person who has genuinely developed their inner life has freed themselves from this confirmation dependence. Their absence from the social world is not a withdrawal from something they need. It is a visit to something they have, the interior that has been built through genuine intellectual engagement, through genuine aesthetic experience, through the honest solitude that Nietzsche also pointed toward. This interior is genuinely inhabitable. It does not require the social world to remain vital. The absence this person chooses is therefore different in quality from the absence that the confirmation-dependent person is unable to tolerate. It is the genuine withdrawal of someone who has somewhere real to go, and the people who sense this, who detect, in the quality of someone's absence, that it is inhabited rather than empty, value the return from that absence in a way they cannot quite explain. Let's look at how Schopenhauer himself embodied this principle, because his life is one of the most instructive examples of chosen, philosophically inhabited absence in the history of ideas. His years in Frankfurt, the deliberate withdrawal from academic life, from the social world that had failed to recognize his work, from the institutions that had marginalized him, were not years of passive isolation. They were years of extraordinary productivity. He wrote, read, walked, thought, engaged with his interior at a depth that the social world he had withdrawn from could not have provided. He was absent from the philosophical conversation of his era in the most complete sense. His contemporaries barely knew he existed. The conversations that mattered in German philosophy in the 1840s and 1850s were happening without him, around ideas he found fundamentally misguided, among people who had long since stopped paying attention to anything he was producing. And yet, the absence produced the essays, the aphorisms, the expanded editions, the sustained thinking that constituted the final, finest layer of his work. The absence was not a gap in the philosophical conversation. It was the condition that made the conversation's eventual discovery of him so remarkable and so complete. When the recognition finally arrived, in the 1850s and 1860s, it arrived not for a figure who had been quietly present all along, slowly building credibility through sustained institutional engagement. It arrived for someone who had been genuinely, completely, philosophically absent, and whose work encountered fresh, carried the full weight of that undiluted interior engagement. The absence had preserved something. The presence that was eventually received was the presence of a mind that had not been gradually absorbed into the furniture of ordinary intellectual life. It was startling precisely because it had been genuinely elsewhere. Now let's turn to the practice, specific, daily, immediately applicable. The first element is audit. Examine your current pattern of presence. Where are you showing up, not because your presence is genuinely valuable, but because absence feels too risky, because you fear being forgotten, being replaced, being written out of the story that your presence was helping to keep you in? These are the presences that most need to be examined, not eliminated, examined. Ask what they are actually providing, whether they are genuinely serving something or whether they are serving the anxiety of potential absence. The second element is quality investment. Before reducing presence, increase its quality. Become more genuinely present when you are present, more attentive, more engaged, more fully there. This is the precondition of meaningful absence. The absence of someone who was partially present leaves nothing to notice. The absence of someone who was fully present leaves a specific, identifiable gap. The third element is genuine interior development. This is what makes the absence inhabited rather than empty. Develop what Schopenhauer called the life of the mind, the genuine intellectual engagement, the aesthetic practice, the private thinking that has nowhere to go in the social world and therefore accumulates in the interior. Build the place you go when you are absent. Make it genuinely rich. Make it genuinely preferable, on some days, to the social world you are choosing to leave. The fourth element is selective return. When you return from genuine absence, return fully. Not gradually, not tentatively, not with the apologetic energy of someone who is not sure their return is welcome. Return with the presence of someone who has been somewhere real and is now here, by genuine choice, with something to bring. Here is what changes when you genuinely practice this, not immediately and not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of a tide. The people who encountered your reliable presence and took it for granted begin to encounter something they did not anticipate, the genuine possibility of its absence. This shifts their relationship to your presence before the absence occurs. They begin to value it differently because they have experienced, even briefly, what its removal felt like. Because the will, once it has registered the gap, cannot return to the blissful unawareness that preceded it. You become someone whose movements carry meaning, whose presence signals something, whose absence generates the question. And the person whose movements carry meaning, whose presence and absence are both information-bearing, both worth noticing, is the person who has genuine weight in the social world, regardless of how frequently they choose to occupy it. Schopenhauer waited decades for his recognition. The absence was long. The return, when readers finally came to the work, was complete. The weight of the encounter was multiplied, not diminished, by the years in which the work had existed unread. Your absence does not need to be decades. It needs to be genuine. It needs to be inhabited. And it needs to end with a return so fully present that everyone who witnesses it understands, without being told, that they were not forgotten during the absence. They were simply not where you were. So here is the final thought, not a summary, but a reorientation. Presence is not power by itself. Constant presence is, in fact, the steady erosion of power, the slow absorption of the remarkable into the ordinary, of the valued into the expected, of the person into the furniture. Power lives in the gap, in what the will orients toward, in what absence reveals about the value that presence was providing, in the specific quality of a return that was genuinely awaited rather than merely continued. Schopenhauer's will is ruthless in this. It passes over what it has. It desires what it lacks. It values what it cannot immediately reach. Work with this, not against it. Not by pretending the will can be educated into appreciating what is always available, but by managing what you make available, and when, and how, fully until your presence is a genuine event and your absence is a genuine statement. What you withhold shapes what is valued. What is valued determines what is respected. And what is respected genuinely, deeply, without requiring maintenance, is the only form of influence worth building. Build it through the careful, considered, philosophically inhabited management of when you are here and when you are not.